It's job season. Internships are starting soon, and people will hopefully start to receive job offers after those are done. We've been getting questions about why we decided to become litigation and corporate lawyers respectively. And while we talked about the nature of our work briefly in our Week in the Life videos, we wanted to share some of the key differences between the two in this video. Disputes lawyers, as the name suggests, help their clients with all things related to legal disputes. To be more accurate, I'm going to use the term disputes here instead of litigation, as disputes technically include litigation as well as other forms of dispute resolution, such as arbitration and mediation. This can include suing others on behalf of clients, defending a claim if the client is being sued, or advising clients in situations where there may potentially be a legal dispute. Generally speaking, disputes work is relatively more academic than transactional work. Disputes lawyers tend to spend a good amount of time on legal research and writing, since the nature of the work is to help their clients figure out how to best argue their case. This requires a thorough understanding of all relevant legal principles, being up to date with relevant legal precedents, and then applying those to your client's situation. As a result, we spend a fair amount of time reading case law and secondary sources like law reports and texts, and also drafting documents like pleadings, memos, witness statements, and letters. We also typically spend a large amount of time reviewing documents for the purpose of something called discovery, which is the process in which parties to a dispute disclose the relevant documents they have. Finally, although it's pretty obvious, keep in mind that the fundamental nature of disputes work is that it's adversarial, and you spend most of your time arguing in one form or another. Overall, you do encounter and have to deal with more hostile situations, and there's also relatively more clear-cut winners and losers, not that that's always the case. The work may look exciting in TV shows, but in reality, it's not for everyone. Some people find working with this adversarial mindset interesting, such as myself, but others find it tiring and stressful.
By contrast, transactional lawyers help their clients with, you guessed it, transactions. This involves drafting contracts, negotiating commercial arrangements, and just helping the client figure out how best to carry out the transaction that they want to carry out. Transactions work is, generally speaking, a little bit less academic and more commercial in nature, but this also really depends on which practice area in question you're talking about. Drafting agreements definitely requires an understanding of basic legal principles to make sure that any of the provisions that are drafted into a contract are legally sound and enforceable. At the same time, on top of making sure that the contracts are legally sound, we want to make sure that the client's commercial intentions are accurately reflected in the contract. That said, as commercial lawyers, we are sometimes asked to issue legal opinions or give advice in relation to transactions, and that can usually involve a little bit more research and is a bit more academic in nature.
There's also a lot of document review in transactions work. When doing due diligence, I review pretty much every relevant document relating to the target company, including all corporate documents, contracts, and anything else which may be relevant to identifying red flags on behalf of my client.
Also, it's worth briefly mentioning that transactional practices are usually a little bit less adversarial than disputes practices, but it's not completely immune from this either. Since everyone in a transaction is ultimately trying to make sure the transaction happens, there's some level of cooperation between everybody involved. But at the same time, each party to the transaction is fighting for its interests first and foremost, so there can be a bit of hostility when it comes to negotiations. That said, while it does depend on the lawyers, advisors, and the parties involved, generally speaking, transactions are a little bit less hostile in nature than disputes work.
So, we've previously touched on the lifestyle and work hours of lawyers in both of our Week in the Life videos. In those videos, we deliberately wanted to show a more regular week as well as a more busy week, and while there are busy periods and quieter periods in both disputes and transactional work, there are some broad differences between the nature of the lifestyles between these practices as well. Please do keep in mind that our takes on this will be based on our own personal experiences, and the lifestyle will always differ due to a variety of factors, such as the firm you work for, the particular team, and the size of that team. With disputes work, there are generally longer timelines from the start of a matter until it's resolved. This is because disputes, especially if they've gone to court or arbitration, can run on for years if the parties don't settle. In terms of the work, deadlines for doing things are largely dictated by process, such as the relevant court rules or arbitration rules, meaning that there are fewer instances of clients suddenly asking for something to be done for their own reasons. These deadlines are also set more in advance, so there's relatively longer timeframes to do things, and it's also somewhat easier to predict your busy periods beforehand. So, on average compared to transactional work, the schedule is less hectic, save for sometimes around deadlines or before hearings and trials or certain urgent applications such as injunctions. In terms of lifestyle, working really late nights like what you see in Lloyd's Week in the Life video was less common for me as a disputes lawyer. On the other hand, because of the drawn-out nature of disputes and the fact that there's regular deadlines throughout the lifespan of a case, I didn't really ever have quiet days. There's always a deadline coming up, and the more active cases you're working on, the more imminent deadlines you have. All in all, I think a good way to describe the pace of disputes work is that it's more of a slow burn.
In transactional practices, the lifestyle and working hours are a little bit different. Our schedules change based on the nature of the active deals we have on at any given time, which means if we have several deals moving at once, or even 1 or 2 deals that are moving really quickly, it can get really busy. On the flip side, when we don't have many deals on, or when deals are moving slowly or are paused even, things can be a little bit more quiet and a little bit more relaxed. One thing to note for transactional work is that deals always have the potential for last-minute things to come up and cause problems. I honestly can't even count the number of times that a client has emailed me or called me really late into the night or on the weekend or even when I'm on holiday telling me that they need something done urgently because they either forgot to do it or maybe the deal terms changed or some other issue came up. On top of this, deal timelines can be super tight if clients need to get deals done really quickly or are in a rush to complete a transaction, and so personal schedules can change very quickly as well. Sometimes weeks can start out pretty quiet, and then all of a sudden you have an urgent transaction that comes in that requires you to work over the weekend and super late into the night. It's not all negative though. On the flip side, when things are really quiet, which admittedly isn't all the time, you can get away with working even 2 or 3 hours in a day when there's just not that much going on. We always say to each other in the industry to take advantage of those times as much as possible to rest and recharge for the next crazy run. I've met people who enjoy transactions work for the shorter time frames and the thrill of the adrenaline that they get from doing things very quickly and working fast. Others enjoy disputes work for the longer time frames and the slow burn. It really comes down to preference, and remember that the experience will change based on the team, the firm, and the practice, and what we're describing is more of a general statement in relation to working hours and lifestyle.
Now, one might think that a disputes lawyer spends a lot of time in court, but in reality, this isn't necessarily the case. The vast majority of the work actually takes place outside of the courtroom, and very few cases make it to trial. Some disputes lawyers I know have even gone 10 or more years without a single case of theirs making it all the way to trial. It may often actually be to the client's advantage to avoid a trial and to settle things outside of court, since going all the way to a trial is both time-consuming and expensive. Another misconception is that as a disputes lawyer, you will spend your time arguing about points of law. In reality, however, you actually spend a lot of time arguing about procedural matters as well, because parties do have a lot of steps that they need to go through before they make it to a trial, if that even happens. Some common procedural issues are where one party wants more time to file a document and the other party doesn't agree, or one party hasn't completely disclosed all the documents they have relating to a case, so the other party is seeking full disclosure. It's really par for the course for at least a few of these procedural disputes to come up in any proceedings.
With transactional work, television has a tendency to portray a lot more action and badassery than actually exists for deal lawyers. A common term thrown around is whether or not a lawyer is a closer.
This is Harvey Specter. He's our best closer.
Well, if you're the best closer, where the hell you been for the last 3 hours?
But in reality, when closing a deal, it's really up to the client and the other parties involved to agree on the commercial position. While there can be some level of influence from lawyers and other advisors in whether or not a deal actually closes, in reality, a lot of the time it's sitting around waiting for the client and the other parties to agree on the commercial position and then letting us know what that position is for us to reflect in the documents. So the unfortunate reality is, the life of a transactional lawyer is not as interesting as the media may portray, and as you'll have seen in my Week in the Life video, which I'll link here, there's a lot of sitting around and drafting. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and check out this video next for a video that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll like.